Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. And I'll start off by saying it's totally Jasmine's fault that I'm here. And peer pressure is a real thing. And I'm also going to say, following on from wooden spoons, that I've been walking in my kitchen all week with a wooden spoon. So instead of a microphone practicing. So yeah. So I'm an academic and I often stand in front of 300 science students, and that's totally fine. But standing in front of 50 of you is a whole lot more daunting. And I think it's a sign that I mustn't be telling enough jokes in my lectures. So my name's Dara, and I'm a scientist. And do we have any other scientists here tonight? Woo! Good. Great. One of the first things you'll notice about me is that I'm actually female, even though my name might suggest otherwise. And for years, I've been very used to getting letters to Mr. Dara Stanley, or people on the other end of the phone are really surprised when my voice is a lot more high-pitched than they were initially expecting. But sometimes this can be useful. And last year, I got an email from a student, and it went something like this. It said, "Dear Mr. Stanley, I was in your lab last week, but I forgot to sign in to get the marks." And immediately I knew that he had obviously not been in the lab. So I'm an academic, and recently I moved institutions from Galway to Dublin. And one of the first things that they ask you to do when you start a new position is they ask you to fill in an online profile and describe yourself. So this is well and good. So I opened up the online form, and it said, describe what you do. And immediately what came into my head was to say something like, "Hi, my name is Dara, I'm really tall, and sometimes I like to make pancakes on a Saturday." But I realised this probably wasn't what they were looking for, and they wanted me to justify my research and why the Irish taxpayer should be funding my job. So the first thing I wrote in this box was, I wrote scientist. I was like, grand, okay. But then I thought, a scientist, we're really good at classifying things, and I don't really know much about physics or chemistry, so therefore I must be a biologist. So that was fine. I wrote down biologist. And a lot of my research focuses on plants and insects, but I don't really know much about cancer biology or microbiology, so I deleted that, and I wrote down botanist, because that described plants. Great. But that didn't really describe the insect part of what I do, so I deleted that, and I wrote down zoologist, but that conjured up ideas of elephants and rhinos and lions, and that was a far cry from insects, so I deleted that, and I wrote down entomologist. Grand, that covered the insects, but not the plants. So I racked my brains, and I thought, what can I write here? And I came up with the term ecologist. And ecology is the study of organisms and how they interact with each other and the environment. So I was like, brilliant, great, I've solved it. But then my brain kept going, and I was like, oh, I can break that down, and maybe I'm a pollination ecologist, or a behavioural ecologist, or a conservation biologist, or an ecological entomologist, or an entomological ecologist. And in the end, I think I realised I'm just a scientist with a huge identity crisis. So as I said, a lot of my research focuses on plants and their interactions with pollinating insects. And when we talk about pollinators, there's a huge number out there. So we're talking about things like flies and beetles and butterflies and moths and bees. And probably one of the most important pollinator groups out there are bees. So does anyone here like bees? Woo, great. So do I. But unfortunately, it's not all good news when it comes to bees, and actually bee declines and declines of other pollinator groups have been recorded worldwide. So a lot of our research focuses on kind of how we as humans are impacting bees and other pollinators, but also what we can do to conserve and maintain bee populations to ensure we've got sustainable pollination going into the future. But when I talk to someone for the first time and they ask me what I do, and I tell them, the first thing they want to do is they want to tell me their favourite bee pun. And I think I've pretty much heard all of them at this point. So it usually starts off something like this, going, so what's it like being a scientist? There must be a real buzz about that. Or that's usually followed by something like, oh, sure, I'm only pulling your leg. It's awful, it's dreadful. But recently somebody asked me what my favourite species of bee was. And I got really excited here because we've got 98 different species of bees in Ireland. So immediately I thought of Bombus distinguendus. It's the great yellow bumblebee. And it's an all blonde bee with a black stripe on its back. And it's quite rare. It's only now found on the Mullet Peninsula in County Mayo. But then But then then my mind went to another bee that I really like. It's the red-shanked carder bee. It's a black bumblebee with a red tail, and the distinctive thing about this species is it's got red hairs on the side of its leg. But then I thought about Osmia orolanta. It's a solitary bee. Each individual little bee builds their own nest in snail shells, and they live on the coast. So you can immediately see the difficult decisions that were going on in my head. But the person who'd asked me the question obviously had gotten fed up with waiting for me to make this really big decision. So they went ahead and they told me what their favourite type of bee is. And apparently their favourite type of bees are boobies. I wasn't expecting that. Anyway. So the main reason really why we're interested in bees and other pollinators is because of their role in helping plants to reproduce. And these are wild plants, but also crops. So does anyone here like strawberries? Yeah. Coffee? Yeah. Chocolate? Yeah. Well, then you also like pollinators, because these are examples. These are examples of some of the crops that benefit from insect pollination. And about 75% of all the crops that we grow globally actually benefit from insect pollination. And it'd be really hard for us as humans to have a balanced diet without them. But how does pollination really work? So when it comes to reproducing, plants have a huge problem. So for animals, it's really easy. They can kind of go around, they can walk around, they can find a mate, they can do this whole courtship ritual, and then they get down to business. So something probably a little bit like R Square at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. That's fine. But plants have an issue because plants have roots. So because they've got roots, they can't move. So you can imagine a situation. So say you've got two plants in a field. You've got one plant here, and at 2 meters away, it can see another plant, and it's a plant of the same species. And it's probably thinking to itself, oh my goodness, look at that plant over there. It's so gorgeous. And look at its stigmas. Oh, they're so amazing. And this plant over here is probably thinking the same thing. It's thinking, oh, look at that plant over there. Look at its bright flowers, and look at its anthers dangling in the wind. Oh my God. But they can't just move towards each other and do what they need to do. They've had to be really creative, and they've had to evolve other ways of transferring their genetic material from individual to individual. And how they've done this is by evolving associations with bees and with other pollinators. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a variety of colours and shapes and sizes of flowers in the world today, and scents and things like that. So in all of their lust, all they can do is stand there and wait for their pollinator to come along. So imagine the pollinator in this case is a bee. The bee comes along, and the bee has no idea what's going on in the situation. So the bee is visiting a flower because it's providing a reward, a food source. So the bee is visiting the flower to drink nectar to feed on, and probably to collect some pollen to bring back to feed its developing larvae, and it usually collects that pollen on the back of its leg. But at the same time, when that bee is visiting the flower, it's actually kind of messy. It's kind of getting pollen everywhere because it's feeding away. And then when it flies to the next flower, it accidentally rubs that pollen from its body off onto the reproductive parts of the other flower. That's how fertilization occurs, and that's how the whole process works. But I was thinking the other day, I was trying to think of a human analogy as to how this might work. So, imagine you went to Super Value to buy your dinner, and you were standing in the frozen food aisle getting your frozen peas, and you accidentally rubbed off someone else and picked up their reproductive material all over your body. You go home. You have no idea that this has happened. You go home, you have your dinner, that's fine. The next day, you're back in Super Value again because you obviously didn't do a good shop the first day, so you're back a second time. And when you're in the spaghetti aisle, you accidentally rub that reproductive material on somebody else's ovary, and all without you realizing it. It's kind of wacky, isn't it? So next time you see a bee on a flower, you can think about how important they are, but also that they're involved in this intricate and very complicated love life of flowers. Cool. So that's all from me. Gur bhíonn amach agaibh agus bíodh oíche iontach agam go léir. Thank you.
Cheers.